My name is Rachel Ward. My pronouns are they, them. I am a queer, trans, non-binary person of faith, and I am the Minister for Gender and Sexuality Justice at the national setting of the UCC. And I am joined by some pretty incredible people to have a really robust conversation today that I'm really excited about getting into. Now, we always have a tradition of letting folks know where you're coming from, so please be sure to let us know in the chat. We are excited to be in conversation with you today. I am going to introduce our panelists, and then we're going to dive right in. Edith Guffey is here with us today. Edith was elected in 1991 as the first Black laywoman to serve as an officer of the United Church of Christ and the only non-ordained conference minister of the Kansas-Oklahoma Conference. Retiring from the conference ministry life in 2021, she has been active on the board of directors for PFLAG National. It's the nation's largest organization supporting, educating, and advocating for LGBTQ plus people and those who love them. Since 2019, and assumed the role of board chair in October of 2024. Congratulations on that, Edith. Additionally, she serves on the board of directors of the Retirement Housing Foundation, a ministry of Chisholm, and Edith has 2 adult children and a grandson, Onyx, who will be joined in April by a brother and sister. Also, congratulations for that. That's awesome. Jen Hagedorn is the pastor of Spirit of Peace UCC in Issaquah, Washington. With a background in community organizing and public health, Jen cares deeply about the intersection of justice and care as it is lived out in communities. In these chaotic and challenging times, Jen and her spouse find grounding in the beautiful mountains of the Pacific Northwest and joy in the new adventures of parenthood with their 1-year-old. Also, congratulations. Reverend Dr. Audra Price is the Deputy Director of the Religion and Society Program at the Aspen Institute in Washington, D.C. She leads major initiatives within the Religion and Society Program, such as the Racial Justice and Religion and Philanthropy initiatives. Previously, Reverend Dr. Price was the Executive Minister for Strategic Operations in the Southern New England Conference for the UCC. And in her spare time, there's quotes there, Reverend Price indulges her passion of reading, traveling to new places, officiating basketball, and her newfound joy of riding motorcycles. Okay. And my friend and my colleague, Reverend Tara Barber, is here with us, who has been serving as your minister for ministerial support and accountability for 5 years at the national setting. She comes to this work as a lifelong Pacific Northwest UCer, camper, and engaged lay leader who has participated in wider church ministries as a teenager, a young adult, and later as a youth leader and companion to older adults. She was ordained in 2001, and she served as an associate pastor in Northern California and co-pastor in the Pacific Northwest, before turning her focus back to the wider church, working with Committee on Ministries, developing a COP program, teaching boundary trainings, and consulting around intercultural compassion locally and beyond the PNC. As you can bear witness to, we have some wisdom in the room with us today. And I am excited to be in dialogue with each of you and really just looking forward to getting into it. So we thought collectively, Tara and I, when we were dreaming up this dialogue for Women's History Month, we were thinking about this moment we're in. It's hard, it's gritty, it's uncertain, it's rough. It has a lot of ups and downs. And we really, really believe in the wider church and the voices of those within the church and in our communities and the wisdom that's held there. For Tara and I, we both think intergenerational leadership is really important. And so we thought having a conversation that was rooted in intergenerational leaders would be something to offer bright hope and honesty for us. So we're going to start there. And this is an open living room conversation, as I've shared with our panelists. And so what that means is we are going to open the space for voices to be heard, and we're going to talk like we're drinking our afternoon coffee, maybe your tea, your water, what have you, and just listen deeply to stories shared here. So I'm going to open it up and kick us off with this first question to ruminate on is, what does the intergenerational work of women in the UCC and in the wider community mean to you? How have you experienced that? Where have you seen that? And perhaps where do you see a need for it in this moment? And I'm going to do that daring thing where I'm going to just let someone go first and see what happens because, why not?
I'll go. Having been in the place where I'm waiting for someone to speak up, I'll go first. Um, and especially in this time, I think back to when I first started in the UCC, which is ages ago to many people, and how important it was for me to hear voices of people like Valerie Russell or Yvonne Delk encouraging me or saying, this is what you can do, or reminding me of things in the past that I had no idea about. And I think in this moment in particular, uh, being in intergenerational circles can help remind people that we've been here before and have come through it. That may sound surprising to some people, but history right now is encouraging because it says we have been here and we have made it through. So I think being in groups that are different generations right now is particularly important.
Thank you for that.
Yeah, and yeah, I really like that a lot, Edith. And it reminds me of Joy Reid, who show just ended, and her last show said, "History is our helper." And so when you said that, I'm reminded of that. I want to kind of stretch the question a little, which is why I didn't want to go first, and also talk about um, the not only the intergenerational leadership, but the intersectionality and how both those enrich our women and what we experience and how there's a need for that. And one of the things that I really appreciate about the UCC as I've served in a number of settings is that interaction, that wisdom that come from folks that do not have the same embodiment that I have, that are not of the same generation or even in the same focus of ministry. And so to have that intersectionality of being in dialogue with lay people, like Edith, there's just been a wealth of wisdom to this denomination. But to also to talk with people who are not of African descent, to talk to folks who are not heterosexual, to talk to people who just look and have a different lens actually strengthens and enriches the voice that we could have as women. And we then have brought that to even the Antoinette Brown Society. And when we're lifting up women's work in this denomination, that we intentionally have said that we have to look across the intersectionality because the last thing I'll say with this is that while this denomination embraces and affirms women leadership in terms of clergy, there's still other places in which we can serve as both laity and ordained clergy outside of the local church. And that should be embraced and lifted up as strongly as the call to the local church.
This is why I'm leaving myself muted because I'm just saying yes, yes,
Yes.
yes.
I'm so humbled to be among so many wise people and really grateful myself to be, in so many ways, a beneficiary of the generations of women and others who have challenged the limitations, the boxes that have been placed around people. I grew up in a UCC church. I'm 35 and was like born and baptized into a UCC church and have literally never known in my like formative years that women didn't preach, that women weren't in leadership roles. I went through OWL our whole lives, sex ed training, which was full of affirmations of queerness and really consent-based relationships. And so to start from that point and then learn later that others had to fight and work for that, it feels like that history is so important for me to know and understand, like you said, Edith, because we need those resources so desperately in this moment. And as a young pastor, it's enormously comforting serving a little bit of an older congregation, to know that there is that wisdom, like just feet from me, in so many directions on Sunday mornings. Yeah, I find that enormously comforting. I think about the Sunday after Roe fell, and you encourage candidness, so that's what I'm going to do. And the rage from especially the older women in the congregation of, we fought to get that here. We remember, a lot of like nurses, we remember what it meant to care for people before that was an option, before that was a legal like guarantee. And so we know how to do it again. We're outraged. And that rage felt like a real pastoral moment to me, to be able to witness that and to know that we can learn lessons from how that was built and some of the pitfalls that were built into that the first time, especially around intersectionality. But we have some real generational wisdom to make sure that women and people with uteruses are safe and healthy and well among us. So that's great comfort to me in these times.
You know, Jen, hearing you talk reminds me of the time that I was new to the UCC, and I thought everything that the UCC was, they'd always been. And being reminded by like Davida Crabtree, of the time that women did not have the same kind of voice or position or power in the church. I remember when LGBTQ people were not as welcome in the UCC. And we have to remember, we have not always been great. You know, we have been, we've been just like any other organization. We have struggled with some of these things, which means they are not to be taken for granted. But it's easy to come in and say, this is a great denomination, which it is, but first of all, it's not perfect. And we have struggled in many places to get where we are. And believe me, we're not there yet.
Yeah, well said, Edith. And what I would add to that, and again, this touches on the wisdom that Edith just shared, and why generational conversations are important. To hear, Jen, from you to say you never had to experience that this weren't the case. Um, in these tough moments right now, to see and to hear from someone who is wise. I don't view you as someone who's naive or is looking at the world in a Pollyanna way, but to have come and served in this denomination, say, I didn't realize that this denomination struggled with that, gives us then the energy to keep the fight going. Because the fight does need to continue, and there are spaces within our denomination, within the Universal Christian Church, and it goes without saying within America, where we need to do this fight. But there's an encouragement to see that there are some benefactors from the work that a mother Yvonne Delk has done, a mother Bernice Powell Jackson has done, and so that's encouraging to me.
Yeah, this might lead us into our next one, because it is also difficult, right? And I feel like I just get such a tiny little sliver of that which is difficult. And so by no means I'm with you all. By no means am I saying we've arrived, we're done. Like everyone else just needs to learn from us, right? Because we've got this down. And in many ways, it's even more disappointing, right? When the work that has been done, when the commitments that have been made in a church, which we hope is the exception, but is almost always the rule to what happens out in the world, lets us down in those ways, then it is all the more painful and enraging when it's coming from from within, and a place that's so close and so dear and so has such access to our spirits.
See, this is exactly why I stay on mute a lot, because but you're right. This conversation is kind of moving us into that wider swath of the second question I have for us. I just want to, you don't need my affirmation, but as someone who is also newer into this swirl of a grand, beautiful, wide tent of theologies and love and care and passion for justice and mercy and grace. All of what you're saying resonates deeply with me. There's so much I don't know, and there's so much I get to know, and there is also so much purpose to my presence, to Jen's presence, to y'all's presence. Like the continuing of that weaving and that honesty of that tapestry is vital, not only for the survival of a denomination, but the thriving of the church, for the thriving of the people of God. No matter if those people believe in God or not, who is made in God's image, the thriving of people. And so I am nourished just by those responses and that honesty that no, I think lifelong discernment is lifelong discernment. And I believe deeply that we're always becoming. If God is, I will be who I will be, then we will be who we will be. And we have to be active agents in who we will be. And so it's really, really healthy and very queer, by the way, to critique in a loving way. I think that's the highest power of love, actually, to be willing to critique. It means that this has meaning and value. And on that note, in meaning and value, we're looking at places of tension. We're looking at, places that need further growth, stories of growth and experiences that need to be shared wider, so that those that are coming along the way can know of the history that is before, and know that I just can't, I wrote it down immediately. History right now is encouraging. I needed that, uh, so that we have those stories so we can remain encouraged and faithful. So, how do you see your voice, your presence involved in these stories? Whose stories have you, borne witness to, that you feel like speaking out into this moment with? Let's spend a little time there. And I'm doing that same thing where I'm just like, let the spirit move.
Maybe this is a place for me to jump in and just do some connective pieces. I was so grateful to be able to travel last week and to be with folks in our Hawaii conference and to celebrate with them, train with them, be a part of their annual meeting, and was gifted by those connective pieces. The singing of the doxology brought me right back to being 6 or 7 years old and being in a congregational church, UCC church, with tall people around singing the same tune, similar words and then different words, right? And as they began their meeting, there was an ecclesiastical council. And if you haven't been a part of that, that's a conversation with somebody who's prepared for ordination, on the cusp of being ordained. And the gathered body gets to engage in conversation with this person about their path toward ministry, their beliefs, how they're going to see themselves in ministry. And it was one of our elder members who was about to be ordained, but who had served in other ways for many, many, many years. And it was this moment of pride and of recognition of gifts and of rightness, and a sense of, wow, there was a lot that had to happen for this moment to even occur. And the gratitude for it occurring in her lifetime, and the sense of how have we challenged, put obstacles in the way of, not seen gifts about women and those who are in some marginalized spaces. So it was this both and, this sense of recognition of the church as it always had been since I was little, and this dream of how it is becoming, and this kind of underlying sense of all the work that went into making this moment possible. I want to just lift up Vi Makuakane and her husband John, who created a school for ministers, and had to fight the powers then to be able to do it. And so these people among us whose stories don't get often shared that have come in and made a way forward. So my gratitude and my heartbreak around the pain along the way toward flourishing in ministry.
Where I've seen both the growth and advancement for women, um, and women as you're using it in this space with the X, WOMXN, as well as places of tension. So I believe that both um, in our nation and faith-based institutions, nonprofit, which is where I'm serving now, in the wider church, and within the UCC. We are doing a much better job of affirming and providing opportunities from women who are not just of European descent, but the tapestry of how those who identify as female in their full embodiment. And so that's been really encouraging. I used to serve as an associate conference minister, and I was in a community of practice, and I just value communities of practice, and so joined a community of practice. Um, and all of those members of my community of practice, and it was one specifically for persons of color in the widest sense of serving as an ACM. And all of those women now have been called at one point in time and was serving as a conference minister, either still or has served as conference minister. And so there's a space where you've seen advancement within our denomination. And we see the kind of the changing of the tapestry and denominational leadership and call, even in that space. And we're seeing more women, again, in the broader sense of how we define that term, being called to serve as settled pastors, as the lead pastor, or as chaplains. And here's the place of tension that I feel that we continue to engage, and has been a huge place of hurt. While we have worked hard for the advancement of women in those spaces, I believe our work has lagged in preparing those spaces to receive those women. And so you just have calamity that leads to hurt and to disappointment. And so, what is the work to prepare the spaces so that the ministry, the work, the gifts are received and not just eaten up? And I guess your follow-up question to me is, what is my voice in that? My voice is it's actually bringing attention that this work needs to be done. And in the work that I'm doing now at the Aspen Institute, I mean, that's why part of one of the initiatives that's so dear to my heart is that racial justice piece that engages the intersection of racial justice and religion. And bringing the voice to the table and addressing these issues and focusing on it and looking at the historical thread that has caused this, and then choosing now the work to eradicate it. And so that's my voice in that, is that we can't pretend that it doesn't exist.
Audrey, as a conference minister in Kansas and Oklahoma, your statements are so true. I've watched across the landscape of the UCC when women or persons of color have been called to what is primarily white spaces. And they think they're ready. They're very progressive. They're UCC, we got it all. And it has been a catastrophe. because that work had not been done in the congregation. And that is hard work to do. And I think that points a little bit to what I think one of the tensions, I think, is who leads that work? Who leads the work? Because actually, most of the church is made up of lay people, folks, you know. And how are lay people empowered in their own congregation, in their own conferences, to lead that work? Because unless the church is prepared for women of color and all colors, then it's going to be a nightmare. I've seen it time and time again. Another place of tension, at least for me, is how do I balance, and women who are like me, who have been around a long time, balance what was to what is? How do you hold both of those in tension? The UCC that I knew and the UCC that is becoming. How do you balance those, not holding too tightly on what was, valuing that and making space for what is to come, even though it may be radically different than the church I knew, and it's still the UCC. I think that is a real tension, at least it is for me and to folks that I talk to of my age. We're retired, you know, we're not like in the loop anymore. So we're just sort of watching from afar.
What you shared is also so true in the Pacific Northwest Conference. Like, I feel like it's important to say it's true everywhere. And that normalization of sacrifice that is such a part of the conditioning for people who are socialized as women is amplified, I think, in ways that are unfathomable for me fully as a white person. But I have borne witness to. Just, yeah, women of color, especially clergy in leadership positions, being absolutely eaten alive by folks who think that they're doing their, and maybe are doing our very best. But that's not acceptable. Like, it shouldn't, we should know how to do better by now, but we don't. And I think admitting that feels like a really important piece of the puzzle at the very least. And I hope that we are seeing the ways that white feminism is just fundamentally untenable for sustained change. I don't know if that's what we're seeing, but a place of tension that I'm feeling is in the local church setting. There is so much anxiety right now. Like in my congregation, I think in a lot of congregations, when I talk to folks, the anxiety level is so high because it feels like so many things are crumbling. And the work is actually to do even more dismantling, like even more dismantling of patriarchy, of racism, of white supremacy, of heterosexism. Like, that's what we actually need to be doing, is more dismantling. And it's really hard to be like, yeah, everything's crumbling and we actually might be witnessing the fall of empire in real time. And we actually need to do more dismantling too, because that's the path to life. Like, death is the path to resurrection, and that's what we talk about. That's what we say we believe in the church, but it's a really different thing when it's being asked of us in real time in a moment of stress and anxiety. But that's what I hope we're willing to do, is to say, if white supremacy is built in to our idea of justice for women, then it isn't actually any kind of justice for women.
You know, Jan, as a follow-up, I wonder, if we're not able to do this kind of work in our churches, how will that spread? I mean, we know that a huge percentage of people, white women, voted for the administration we have. And what does that say about the work we're doing or not doing, not only in our churches, but beyond?
I mean, it feels like in this moment, like white women as the biggest recipients of DEI work in this country, right? We have been the biggest recipients, and now we're seeing it dismantled. And I think a lot of white women are believing that it won't get to us. It won't be dismantled far enough. And this willingness to sacrifice others, especially people of color, especially women of color, trans folks, if we're willing to sacrifice anyone for the power that we want to hold on to, we have to know it's coming to our doorsteps eventually. But that cognitive dissonance, that ability to live in cognitive dissonance, is a real spiritual sickness. I don't have any answers, I feel like, about your question, right? But I'm just amening to all of what you're saying. Yeah.
We hold such importance in our modeling of behavior to one another. It's hard because it's supposed to be hard. Being human is hard and messy, and yet is one of the most profound, prolific, beautiful experiences that we get to do is by being human with another person. I at this current moment in my call and my trajectory, I serve the national setting, right? But what that means to me is that I walk alongside the local church and the wider church. It's you that touches the ground. And if we don't touch the ground together, if we don't work on the garden and widening that, then we're going to miss the mark and we'll be a part of the problem. The beauty of why I say yes to the UCC and say yes to our particular wider theology swirl, and I say swirl because I feel like the swirl is because we're human, right? And we're swirly. We have a lot of things and a lot of thoughts. Is we do have this history of being a robust denomination who said yes to justice things before others. And we do have a history of being a denomination who has admitted to fault when we have faulted. And we have this like rupture point of existence right now where we can come together in our local spaces, our wider church together collaboratively and name what we've missed the mark on, name what we aren't doing and do that. I'm a huge believer. And if you get to know me personally and hear me say this, you can find my work email. We can be friends. We can do this work together. I believe small is all. I think small is all makes the change. I believe in emergent strategy. Adrienne Maree Brown, look Adrienne Maree Brown up. I believe in small is all. I believe in the ripples of our local communities and how that goes outward. So Edith's question, and really kind of like that marrying question for us to like really take in and think about for a while about, how will that spread? What we do in our congregation, in our daily walk with God, in our moments of passing folks along the walk path and having conversation, that makes a difference and a change. It may not feel like that right now, but it absolutely does. And we do have stories and markers of that taking place. I'll use myself as a story and a marker and giving you like a hope of like, it does work. Right now, I live in Georgia. I am a member in discernment with the Penn Central Conference in Pennsylvania State College. Like my home congregation is in State College, Pennsylvania. Because someone said yes to me as a queer trans person and said yes to shattering some ceilings and doing some unconventional, I'm like 5 months away from the beautiful moment of being ordained. And that's a new thing. That's the church doing a new thing. And it's so possible. These are rural Pennsylvania, salt of the earth people who are giving a shout out right now, but it's a story to give you a mirror example. That's rural small as all. And they said yes to something they don't understand. Like my committee on ministry said, we don't understand they, them, we don't understand non-binary and trans. We want to. So tell us where we can learn, And that's it. Do the hard work. Say yes to the hard work. And then invite people in. But don't do miseducation and take people's energy for it. Pay people for their work, pay people for their worth, use your resources and your funding. And I believe the UCC has the ability to do that in ways that other denominations can mirror with and other spaces can mirror with. But that small is all, that right there, that asking yourself, how will that spread? it's those kind of decision points and different choices that do make a difference and change people's lives.
Yeah, I agree with that wholeheartedly. And and this is where I'm gonna get myself in trouble, but I'm just gonna be really honest here. So that is so, I think, the way. And not only does the UCC has the ability to do it, I think what the UCC lacks is the willingness and the truth saying that it should be doing it. I am so weary of the necessity or the feeling that the wounded has to be the one to fight for their liberation. I think that those, like a Rachel, like a Jen, like others who have the embodiment of the people who need to build the bridges should be the leaders of those conversations to their own people and then invite us in. But why, one of the things that this election has done, so it started with the confirmation hearings of Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson, where, I watched that and I watched white men assault or attempt to assault her very humanity just because she was qualified, just because she was nominated to a position that she was ready on day one to serve, and just because that threatened their security. And then we fast forward to the election, and it's the same thing. And this is what I believe that Edith was talking about and what we experience when you're talking about people of color working in white space. That is the huge piece. And we should not have to bear the burden or the cross of the convincing of the minds. It really should be those who are enlightened, who are of European descent, to talk to your sisters and brothers, your siblings, and do the work.
You didn't get yourself in trouble. That's honesty. That's what we that's all we could be is honest, and that's what we need to be. And you're right.
For all that I value and appreciate the UCC, and they shaped me in so many ways and gave me so many opportunities, I think one of the things we have not done well is to talk honestly about race. There's been the fear of, if I say this, somebody's going to do this, they're going to call me that, which inhibits the conversation, especially among white people. And so the unwillingness to really be vulnerable and have conversations about race, not around us Black people, but around you white people, I think, because that's the majority of our churches. Being able to have the hard conversations about race. Why aren't they up in arms about DEI being eliminated? Why? Why are you quiet about that? What does that mean? Have they done their own internal work before they want to partner with us?
Well, and even have we done our work enough to be in relationships of trust where we can be challenged, right? That it was in an Antoinette Brown meeting talking about those confirmation hearings and hearing the truth telling that this same kind of contempt, this same kind of self-righteous anger that would deny her gifts were also experienced in the UCC among our siblings of color as they served in white spaces. And I give thanks for that work, that emotional labor that was done. And I give thanks for the efforts to be in relationship and to be able to hear that. So that's my part of this work, is to help create those safe places where where we can, as white people, have these harder conversations, where we can realize that there's a connection between those things that happen in the political sphere and those things that happen in the church and those things that happen in our communities and those things that happen in our families. And how can we do the work together in those settings? Because it's all of a piece. So I'm grateful, and I'm reminded again of my part in this work, which is to work among my communities.
Well, we did ask for stories and growth, intention, and honesty, and we have a lot to chew on and think about from this space and onward. And hopefully, not just think about, hopefully, embody and ask ourselves, where is the work within our bodies? And then where is the work within the communities we belong to? Change starts here and goes outward. At least I think so. And so investing in that change in you and doing that work with you and not at the expense of others is very important. I appreciate that. In my queer identity, I have started a practice. I know I do this work, but I do this work between certain hours. And then after those hours, I have an iPhone note that lives in my phone. And when people ask to engage me and talk about certain things that I know is going to either potentially create harm or take energy from me that I don't need to give yet, I send that iPhone note as my most loving offering and say, here are these links. Here are these people who you can go and be in community with. And when you've done that, come back and tell me. And then we can have a different kind of conversation. We should never be in the business ever capitalistically with our bodies of arguing for our humanity. But I will demand respect. Respect can be in place with our dialogue and at our tables. There's a difference. I'm no longer in the business of arguing for my humanity, but I am in the business of seeking respect, not just for myself, but for all siblings that I'm in community with. I want to get free as a queer person, and that means that we all get free. I want us all to be free. There's liberation in all of us, and intersectional liberation. There's generations and generations and generations of this thought process within white feminism, within whiteness, that holds so much of a narrative. It's like a Jenga tower. You know the Jenga like game. I really like the one that's like adult sized bricks. Those are really fun for me. But if someone comes and takes that bottom part of the Jenga tower and it just goes like this, that's really terrifying to some people, right? Because that's what they've been built on their whole lives. And so that's the hard part of the work, is doing that in spaces that are not incurring harm on others while you're being educated to remove those pieces and replace them with honesty and truth and your place in that purpose and movement. And it's so possible and it's so doable. I want to, we're at 4:18, so I want to get us to our last question. But I want to slow down for a second to say thank you for all of your honest and direct conversation with that question. It's important to be seen and to be heard, and to know what still is at stake. And so I want you to know that I'm very appreciative of you all doing that here. Our last kind of question movement is around the moment now and the onward, which we've really been talking about this whole time, right? But, you know, in your intuition, in your ancestor leaning, I'm doing a lot of calling on ancestors and elders right now to do thriving instead of surviving in this moment, as a queer person specifically. And then your wisdom, whether that's your own wisdom or wisdom of others that you've heard in passing. What do you think this moment requires of us for justice making and for care, specifically for women now and as we move onward? I know it's kind of a big question, right? I did this.
No, it's a big question and it's a good question. One of the things that I have found helpful in this season, which I feel like has been woven through the whole conversation, is connecting folks to those who have gone before, who have made a difference. And Rachel, I really appreciate your call to continue to look at like me, myself, like starting small, the small is all, and how that fractals out into the world. And one of the people that I feel compelled to name in this season is a woman who I never actually met, but her name's Catherine Swadley, and she's one of the saints, one of the ancestors who holds I think a lot of spirit space here at Spirit of Peace in my local congregation. She came to the church shortly after her son John died of AIDS, and she came with a real conviction that she wasn't, as folks tell me, right, that she wasn't able to protect him, and that she wanted to create spaces of protection for other people's children. And she's a large part of the reason why Spirit of Peace became open and affirming in 2001, which was early-ish in the world of UCC. And she, as the stories go, wore buttons, just like anti-war, pro-women, white supremacy, just all the buttons everywhere she went. And she was a lot of people's first invitation to protest, to standing outside with a sign, to putting their faith in more public action. And so reminding folks of the resource that they already have and that they speak about with such reverence and is still present, not falling into the trap of progress being always and continuous, where I think we sometimes are tempted to just sit back and wait for it to progress a little bit further, but to draw on the resources that still, like time bending, feel very present in this moment. That to me feels like one of the practices that gives me hope. And then to not become complacent. I was a little nervous about saying yes to this panel because I think there are ways that I've experienced talking about women as a way of talking about like a real like cult of womanhood that is very much white and straight and cis and just very narrow. And so I said yes in trust that it wouldn't be those things. And I'm so grateful for the ways it hasn't been those things. But continuing to challenge any ways that I receive privilege as ways that I am being disconnected from the truth of the gospel, and to keep coming back to the gospel as resource and as challenge, that the pastoral and prophetic are not two binaries, but are very much wrapped up in the same thing. And what does a real pastoral challenge look like? And what does a prophetic comfort look like? And continuing to queer and trouble the complacency that would have us think that we don't have a really important voice as people of faith, as women of faith in this particular moment.
Yeah. Well, Jen and I met for the first time on this panel, and so I am grateful that you said yes. You have added a voice that needed to be lifted in this conversation. I've been asking myself a version of this question ever since November 5th. And so what I'm wrestling with and what I believe comes from my ancestors is to not only survive, but thrive. To be well in this moment is the resistance that I will give. That is the beginning, that is the grounding piece of it. And then the work that I shall be doing in this moment will come. But it's very important in the midst of all of this craziness and this oppression and this dehumanization to not only survive, but to thrive. I recently took a flight, and they had this, one of the series that they had was Fannie Lou Hamer's America. So honestly, I had not heard about it, and so I watched it, and it was just a reminder again of what we have gone through from where we have come. And while some of that is repeating, we still have advanced. And, we all, most of us are familiar when Fannie Lou Hamer said, I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired. But she also asked the question when she was speaking on the floor before legislation. She said, is this America? Is this the land of the free, the home of the brave? She said, no, this is the land of the tree and the home of the grave. And she refused. She followed by saying, we've been down for so long, we have no other way to go but up. She refused to allow the land of the tree and the home of the grave, the lynching tree and the graves that are storing the bodies of the freedom riders, the civil rights leaders, to confine and define who we are and what our future would be. And so, what's holding me in that moment is her tenacity in the midst of even being arrested and beaten, that she moved forward. And the last thing I'll add is I've been reading Cole Arthur Riley, and there's a piece where she asks about fear. Because there's some terrible theology that's just been thrown around in the midst of all this craziness. Um, and the question is asked, what do we do when our fears are in fact rational? When fear and wisdom are enmeshed? And then she reminded us, and this is what my commitment is in the midst of this, not only surviving but thriving, is to strengthen the communities in which I am a member so that our souls and our hearts would be well. And I encourage all of us on here who want better in the face of this. She writes, I cannot promise you everything will be okay, but breathe. Listen, you are no coward. You are making it the best you can in a land of many hunts. I'll stay awake with you just like this until you're ready to close your eyes. Breathe. Whatever is to come or never comes, we'll take turns keeping watch together. So I am committed to join those who are willing to keep watch, to be well in this moment, which means attending to my self-care, like what Rachel was saying, to have the tough conversations, like Jen was talking about, to lean into the wisdom of our elders, like Edith, and to do the work that's called at my hands, believing that it is not in vain. There is craziness. And I guess the Baptist side of me is going to come out, but I do believe that weeping may endure for a moment. But this fool in the Oval Office is not going to make me miss my joy that will always come in the morning.
Well, I don't have a lot to add to that, except I always say to remember this is a journey, not a sprint. And it's beginning to really feel like a journey. I was on a Zoom call with about, as chair of PFLAG, there must have been about 300 or 400 people on that call. And they were terrified. They were terrified, as you might understand. And PFLAG has in the past really distanced itself from the church because the church has given so much, created so much pain in the LGBTQ plus community. But that's kind of hard to distance themselves with me because it's sort of who I am now. And they asked me to close out that Zoom meeting with a few words. And my words to them were, for such a time as this, we are where we are for such a time as this. And to remember that we are each gifted in a particular way and are called to use those gifts. And I think of that mostly when many of you have probably been to the Equal Justice Initiative, been to the museums there. And as I walk through those halls, I find myself angrier and angrier and angrier. But by the time I get out, I am grateful, just deeply grateful that those folks who went before us, went before me, knew that it was a journey and not a sprint. And that's what I try and remind myself of every day, regardless of the news, regardless of what we're going to hear tonight. This is a journey, not a sprint.
Mm. I love that we had this space and time together. And I'm a person who believes in silence and breathing, so I needed it. I hope that others receive gifts and nourishment from it and empowerment. If you're a person who needs direction for empowerment, we have three things because I'm very Trinitarian like that. We do have something really beautiful coming that I'm really excited about. That Tara's really excited about as well, and um, we are curating a unique experience. It's not going to be a webinar like this. It's going to look like this with all the faces on the screens, but we're going to get to talk to each other. It's called Into the Deep, using the Synod, General Synod theme, Women to Women series, and it will happen once a month starting April. So April, May, and June we'll have these. And then at General Synod, we'll have a community networking in-person moment. So if you're thinking about coming to Synod, let this be an empowerment to come and be with us, because we'll get to bring that community into the physical space together at Synod. But this is a way for us to have a larger, intimate communal setting to learn and grow and be in care with each other. So come be a part of this. The registration is open today, and I have to thank Andrea, who is on the back end of this webinar, who made that possible for us to make sure that we had that registration up. Register, let us know that you'll be with us. We're really looking forward to this new way of being together. It is an experiment to do something like this, and we know that making new opportunities is important. And making community available is important too. The other opportunity for action is our Justice and Peace Action Network through our DC team. There's a link coming for you to sign up to be a part of the JPAN network. There's also another link about taking action for our trans and non-binary siblings. The DC office wanted me to uplift, and I also wanted to uplift. We do have positive news in this movement, right? And it is a movement, and it is not a sprint, it is a journey. But some positive news to celebrate this Women's History Month is that the Senate last night defeated the so-called Protecting Women and Girls in Sports Act, which essentially would have prohibited trans female athletes from competing in sport and put federal funding on the line for any schools that didn't comply with this prohibition. And so our DC office wants to thank those that were using the JPAN network to advocate with those elected officials to express their opposition. We get things done by doing it together and using our voices. So this is one way to do that. And my third Trinitarian offering is going to come from Reverend Tara here.
Thank you, Rachel. I'm so grateful for the ways that the Antoinette Brown Society is in partnership now with the Women's Working Group and with Gender Justice to be able to support and equip and connect more folks across the denomination. And so thank you for your leadership in this series and for the series to come. And, speaking of a journey, Antoinette Brown was the first white woman ordained in mainline Christianity in the United States. We used to have that much shorter, but we're recognizing the limitations of this, right? In 1853, an abolitionist she was ordained for a hot moment in a congregational setting because, she scared folks. So, as was then, as maybe is still today. But we live in her legacy of hope and of hard work and of challenge. And so I'm grateful for the ways that her legacy continues. We recognize and affirm awardees at General Synod. We have an event that's an in-person event for clergywomen every other year, and we're working at ways to have year-round connective opportunities like the ones that Rachel just mentioned. We are fully donor supported. There's no budget line item that goes to the Antoinette Brown Society, but as you know, all of the budget line items come from donations to the United Church of Christ. So we're just inviting you to direct some of those donations to the Antoinette Brown Society for our work, for this webinar, for our time together, and for all that we could make possible as we work in collaboration. So thank you. Thank you for being here. Thank you for all that you bring to this work.
Thank you, Tara. You register for this webinar, which means you get a beautiful follow-up email with all of these links. So don't feel like you have to scurry in the chat to grab them all. We just wanted to be able to articulate to you what those opportunities were, and you'll see them in the post video on UCC's YouTube channel. I just want to once again thank our panelists so very much. I am honored and humbled to be in this work, in this call, for such a time as this, alongside each of you. Please know that I am here, Tara is here, and we are here to take care of each other. And so if you ever need anything from us, to reach out. And please know, to those and all watching, you are so loved. Take care of yourself, rest, drink water. H2O is really important. Drink your water, call your friends, get into your Signal text threads with your community, have a dinner, supper club moment, make art, even if it's really bad. It doesn't matter. Just do something that brings you joy and beauty, because joy is the ultimate resistance, and absolutely no one can take your joy. Be well and continue to celebrate the wonderful women in your life. Onward. Looking forward to being with you soon. Peace, y'all.